8 countries ensnared by the Chinese debt trap. 1. Zambia. China holds up to 1/3 of Zambia's external debt. In 2018, it got so bad, it threatened the country's sovereignty. The issue concerned ZESCO, Zambia's state-owned power company. It was in talks about repossession by a Chinese company. The Zambian government refused to authorize the deal. As a result, Zambia defaulted in 2020. Inflation has since risen by 50%. Unemployment hit a 17-year high. Zambia still owes around $6.6 billion. 2. Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was the second Chinese debtor to default. Its foreign exchange reserves were just $1.9 billion. Yet it had to repay $4 billion to various creditors. Sri Lanka's first ever sovereign default occurred in April 2022. The economy has collapsed. This was fueled by China's lending large amounts for vague purposes. The Matala Rajapaksa International Airport has sat unused since it was built. Another Chinese-funded project was the Hambantota International Port. It turned out to be a non-profitable white elephant. 3. Pakistan. Pakistan's debt to China was $7.2 billion in 2017. By 2020, it had grown to $30 billion. China holds 1/3 of Pakistan's external debt. Pakistan would need 40 years to pay it back. With the accumulated interest, it gets even worse. China has funded hydropower projects in Pakistan. Now Pakistan must pay back $200 billion in 20 years. It has so much foreign debt, it can afford to keep the electricity on. Blackouts are hurting the economy and fueling unemployment. In early 2023, the annual rate of inflation reached 31.5%. 4. Laos. Laos's public debt has skyrocketed to 89% of GDP, or $14.5 billion. 47% of all foreign debt is owed to China. Laos owes 11% more of its debt to China from bilateral loans. China has taken effective control of Laos's electricity grid. By extension, that extends to water resources. Chinese banks have funded a $6 billion China-Laos railway. Laos only owns 30% of the venture. 5. Djibouti. Djibouti has borrowed to develop a strategic port. Now 77% of the country's total debt is owed to China. That accounts for a whopping 80% of its GDP. Djibouti became host to China's first overseas military base in 2017. However, inflation and drought has put Djibouti in a bind. In July 2023, it had to halt payments to China. Djibouti's debt payments tripled in 2022 to $184 million. They're expected to rise to $266 million in 2023. 6. Kenya. Chinese debt accounts for 21% of Kenya's foreign debt. China lent Kenya funds to build highways. The loans also financed a railway between Mombasa and Nairobi. The total came out to over $6.5 billion by 2020. Kenya came close to default to develop its largest port. The Kenyan government is considering austerity measures. This is the only way to manage a mounting debt repayment crisis. Many in the country fear China may take over the port of Mombasa. 7. Uganda. Uganda's parliament actually investigated Chinese lending. They concluded that China's non-public loan terms were onerous. The loans were for a $200 million expansion of Entebbe International Airport, but a default will mean the loss of the airport. China has rejected these allegations. 8. Suriname. Suriname is unable to pay the interest on Chinese loans. China has refused to renegotiate the terms. Suriname is facing bankruptcy. It asked the IMF for a relief package, but the $700 million that the IMF offered remains undisbursed. China refuses to allow a debt restructuring.